I don't know. I have a lot of friends who kind of ask me like, "Hey, you take me on tour?" Or like, "Where can we? How can I get my music out of San Diego?" And there's no other simple way than just get on the road, book your tour. Oh, but I need a booking agent. Well, you're not going to have a booking agent. You need to just write to promoters and go to Portland and play some hall with some punk bands, and then meet people at the show. And then the next month when you can go up there, you can like make connections.
Author and Punisher, the one-man band industrial doom band created by Tristan Shone, was named one of the most prolific acts in aggressive music by Noisey. Recently signed to Relapse Records, his new album Beastland is due for an October 2018 release. Tristan recently sat down with me and Mike to talk about how he got into building his own instruments, inspiration for his lyrics, the importance of a record label versus self-releasing, and why you should be touring to develop your fan base, and more. So without further ado, here's the podcast with Tristan of Author and Punisher.
Hi, this is Mike Peasley, and I'd like to welcome to another Soundiron podcast. We're here with Author and Punisher, and we're going to talk about a little bit of everything, about his music and about his brilliant instruments, and just kind of generally his philosophy. It's kind of fascinating music, so it's something that is definitely worth a deep dive into. Tell us a little bit about Author and Punisher.
Well, Author and Punisher started out as just like kind of a one-man doom metal project. Industrial doom, I guess. I would play guitar, sing along with a drum machine, and brought these big monstrous speakers with me, and it was very slow, and I had a lot of program beats and program synth, and I was in art school at that time, so it was I was experimenting with like fun videos and building my own speakers. But then it just kind of, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I started building these kind of robotic sculpture and things like that as a part of my degree. And I just sort of combined all music, art, and engineering and started designing these like elaborate or just kind of industrial electromechanical sound controllers for software.
Why?
Yeah. Because basically as a one-person band, you're playing guitar along with a sequence. And that sequence can just kind of... it doesn't sound live. You basically, I'm sure you've seen a lot of bands do this. They just press play, sequence runs, they play guitar along with it. It doesn't have that thing that makes it feel live, that improvisational drag or syncopation.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it live.
But there's something different about the hardware you use. I mean, it's really hard to quite describe it unless, people listening go take a look at some of these machines. They're not just musical controllers. There's an art to it that it's so perfectly meshed with the audio that you couldn't imagine it being produced in any other way. Like when you see it, it's like this is the first time I think I've ever seen industrial music that feels totally meshed with where the visual and the sound are fully formed.
Yeah, I mean that's, and to tell you the truth, I wouldn't say it wasn't that intentional. I mean, I'm a fan of heavier industrial. I don't like a lot of EBM, or I don't like really much of where industrial went. Post Robin Gristle, Godflesh, Ministry, went in this direction that basically became like Hot Topic and,
But it's almost like it pulled from the earlier side of industrial and made that the centerpiece. So
that's what I mean. The heavier, kind of more visceral, kind of industrial is really what I like. I mean, I also like death metal, like doom metal, but just the combination of that and actually being a mechanical engineer who really, I like working with those components that I work with.
Yeah, I mean, for those who kind of know the genre, I'd almost describe you more. It's like if you took Ministry and fucking crystallized it, but then took all the. I don't want to say this in a bad way, but took the joke out of it. It feels pure, and the lyrics are much more prose and poetry than I think I've seen in industrial in a long time. And it's not just this sort of I hate myself, I'm mad at my dad kind of sense. It feels like it's trying to make a bigger statement. I don't want to over sort of sell it, but as somebody who kind of grew up in industrial and sort of worked through it, and like I think you really nailed it in a way. And like you said, it doesn't sound intentional in that you decided I'm going to be the best, and I'm going to be like the revival of fucking Throbbing Gristle or something. It sounds like you've got something to say.
Yeah, as I said, it was an organic process, and I'm not like that cynical of a person or angsty. You know, I had a good upbringing. My dad worked in kind of the robotics industry as a plant manager, making robotics components. My mom was a computer teacher. You know, I grew up with tech, and I kind of embraced that world and started working in that industry, but then got frustrated with it being I just got frustrated with the lifestyle. I was playing in bands this whole time. I got frustrated with the lifestyle, meaning go to a tech park, sit in a lab, be closed in, and not have any access to the outside world.
Yeah.
And that's what music gave to me, is this kind of, it's an adventure, you know? And so for me in my mid 20s, it was like, how do I combine these things into something that's valuable to me? I like innovation. I like music. I like sculpture. It's frustrating to play with other people, so I want to play myself. And it was just this culmination of dark music, robotics, and I don't know, in art. That's really what happened. I don't know. There's a lot of decisions that could have been made differently to make it not happen.
So how did you? You know, I could easily imagine the style. I mean, the sort of the congregation of sort of traits that your music has, both in the terms of, you know, the robotic aspect, the musical aspect. What took it in the dark direction as opposed to towards something more like, I don't know, Imogen Heap or something like that?
Well, I mean, how old was I when I heard, let's see, I think I first heard Sepultura, you know, in like 91. Nice. And then I heard like the Melvins Lysol album, and then Godflesh, Street Cleaner, and you know, those were all like around that time. And you know, I grew up listening to, like, I hadn't even heard Black Sabbath at that point. You know, I for some reason the dark stuff just caught on with me, and it was never because this is like the same thing that's in my head or the experiences that I'm having as a, you know, a child, a lonely child. No, I had a good upbringing. I grew up on a farm. I was happy. I played soccer. You know, it's like it was just the intensity and the emotion that you could feel in this music. And like, it brought me to this kind of like fantasy land of the movies that I loved, you know, the darker movies, the original Alien, and like some of the Kubrick movies and stuff like that. And so it was kind of like, it was really fun. It was like, the music was like, oh man, this is, and so my friends and I would like play that kind of stuff in our like Cure, similar to Cure, Fugazi kind of band in high school. And I always wanted to take it darker and slower, but I could never find people that really wanted to explore the depths of like slow and dark and really exaggerate that gesture. And at some point you just kind of got to like get rid of people and just say, no, this is what I'm going to do.
Totally.
And it's hard to get somebody to really follow your artistic idea, especially if it's kind of on the total extreme of one end.
Yeah. Or even if you're just going really experimental, some guys aren't willing to do that. Maybe they just want to do that one thing, but then maybe you personally want to just take it everywhere. And some people, that's just too out of left field for them. So it's like, I totally agree with the whole, sometimes you just got to take it all in your hands and just run with it, because that's the only way to truly see like the artistic vision come to life.
I also think going to, you know, making a decision to go back to art school at about 26 years old it was a time when if I had just been a weekend warrior with music, you know, I bought like a truck at that point. I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a car so I can tour. But then I went on a few like small tours and like in the Northeast where I was living. And I started to realize that like, that's not what musicians do when they want to really get into this, or this is not what artists do. You have to take that gesture itself needs to be much more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, being a weekend warrior musician or artist is not for me. Like I need to quit what I'm doing as an engineer and go back. And I think being in art school and just being around other people that were fully like, yeah, some were painters, some were doing new media programming and installation, and just like every day, like hammering it out with these people, drinking all night, hammering it out during the day, drinking, going down to Tijuana, going to art shows up in LA. It was kind of like, okay, now I'm immersed in this world. It's over. Like I'm not going back to engineering. Of course, I end up going back to engineering, but
the circuitous path that we take.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where the money is. So, you know, I went back and took a job in a much more pleasurable environment.
How do you enjoy doing that and the music? Is that something that you would love to just eventually just do the music full time? Or do you really love sort of like, because you do microscopy, right?
I do microscopy, yeah. I mean, I'm not a microscopist, I guess you would say, but I work for a bunch of biologists and physicists who basically that's their whole life. And I am kind of an enabler and redesigning some of the components on these really high-end microscopes. I like it a lot. The people that I work with are brilliant. These guys have given me the freedom to tour. Their understanding of that, we kind of established that pretty early on.
That's awesome.
It's not. I think because of that relationship, there's less money. You know, I didn't follow them. If there's many companies I could go work for, if I wanted to cash in on that, but it's.
But you would lack the freedom.
I lack freedom, but also, you know, I have to say it's the science that we're involved that I really, you know, I'm fully behind. You know, when we're researching Alzheimer's or getting papers in Nature and Science and microscopy today and all these things, it feels like you're doing something that is outside of financial gain. You know, you're doing science for science sake.
Yeah, I mean, with real world impacts on future health of people.
Yeah, exactly. It feels, you know, even though some of this stuff is far away, and I wouldn't say the people that work in this world are necessarily happier than the ones that cash in and go work for an industry. I mean,
probably sadder in a certain sense.
They're really isolated. You know, These guys are 100% like committed to their science, and sometimes that's to the detriment of family and like personal mental health. But they're passionate about it. You know, they're not doing it for money.
So, what are your lyrics about?
Man, my lyrics are. Sometimes I have to reflect after the fact, because when I'm actually writing them, they're a bit ambiguous. And, but I mean, my lyrics are all over the fucking place. On the new album, I've got, like the song Night Terror that I just released was basically I actually used to have night terrors as a kid. And I think some of those elements that are in those night terrors kind of have stayed with me a little bit. And I sort of tried to find a way where that chaos that exists within those sort of dreams where you're actually awake, which is what I would say a night terror is. It's like a nightmare, but you're actually awake and you remember everything.
Like sleep paralysis?
It's sleep paralysis, but you're actually walking around. Like I'd walk into my parents' room and we would like talk about it. And I think some of that that feeling that I would have comes back to me at times when I'm actually conscious. Like it's almost like an extreme anxiety when I'm under extreme pressure. I feel that exact that sense comes to me, and also, so I try to like, I would say even the whole album is some of that extreme anxiety mixed with the pressures of like the bullshit that we're having to deal with right now every day. Every day you wake up and you look at the news, and I'm sure people have been saying this all through time, but you have to.
No, society's essentially collapsing right now. We're watching.
It's a very unique, like, kind of nationalist plus environmental disasters are imminent, and so that it's a lot of stress. And I think like Beastland is in many ways just about this kind of just
primal sort of rage,
and also like chaos and also severe confusion. And so there's kind of a lot of like diarrhea of the mouth coming out of this album of like some nonsensical
so it's more fugue state sort of expression than it's trying to like tell a story.
Exactly. There's one track, Pharmacide, the first track, which I guess is like directed at a certain beast that I like, which would basically just be industry of capitalism and in terms of like pharmaceutical industry or like telecom, and kind of like as a entity that's taking advantage of weaker subjects. And so like that's kind of like where I tried to take Beastland, is every song was going to be focused on kind of one of these aspects. I didn't really follow that maybe as much as I originally planned, but that's kind of where I was trying to take it.
When you you have a really unique microphone that you sing into, is that generally what you use to record your vocals, or
no,
is it mainly a live tool?
I used to use it, I would say, up through the Ursus Americanus album, which would, so pretty much, actually that's the only album that I really used it 100%. And you can hear it because the preamps that I built for each mic kind of weren't built properly, so they like buzz and stuff, which I find to be nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, it doesn't, it just kind of has this natural hiss to it. But no, I basically got to the point where I was like, I can run it through the same effects and use a nice, you know, condenser mic or whatever, and it'll sound the same. But like there are certain songs like on Terrorbird or on Lonely, those older songs, where I was really using each of the mics as a MIDI controller and as a different effect on a mic. And so I would cycle through the different mics. Now I just, you know, it's like, okay, I'll put a really delayed effect on the first mic, and then the fourth mic will have like my main forceful, slightly gained, slightly doubled, and then the two mics in the middle might have like something else on them.
So do you kind of move your mouth around this, because the mic is kind of like a C shape, or like kind of a parenthesis bracket kind of thing?
Exactly. There's actually 8 mics on it, but I don't use the bottom 4 because I found that it's like, for whatever reason, 4 and 4 is the right number. For a given what's in my head, that's all I needed. So actually, if I could just cut the bottom off of it, I would. But that's the way it is for now. But yeah, I can feel like there's holes on the other side. I can feel them, so I know without even having to look. I know where each mic is. I can feel it. So there's certain parts of the song where you want to really like drawn out, high delay, high reverb, background drone, and then you can do that and it'll kind of hold out, and then you can go back to the main mic and do the main vocals.
It's different in your execution, but like it reminded me the way that you can kind of go between vocal sort of forms. I mean, I guess it's something that people have been doing in industrial for a while, but to use different types of distortion and effects and move between that and clean is kind of new. It's sort of reminded me more like Tomahawk in a sense.
Right, Mike Patton for sure.
Yeah.
Yep, I would say he's an influence for sure. You know,
Absolutely.
Those guys. Yeah, him, King Buzzo, and you know, just some of the creativity that those guys had, and just their fearlessness of just being a little bit weird in that world. 100%. I actually got to meet him briefly at a show in Tucson But we didn't get to talk for very long. I wanted to talk to him a lot more, but it was a busy night.
Yeah.
Was it a show that you guys played, or did he come out, or?
It was a Dead Cross show, and I was opening for them.
Oh, okay.
The guy, Justin Pearson, and Michael Crane, who were in that band, are for Retox, San Diego band, and also the Locust. Justin Pearson is in. So I've known him for a while, so we stay in touch.
Oh, that's cool.
Tell me about the throat. Is that a microphone that you wear around your throat, or what is that sort of strap thing?
So that's it's an idea I had a long time ago to basically, I have a lot of these kind of gestures. I call them gestures because they start out as kind of a much more performance art-based design, like, which maybe someday in my life, I'll be making these things. And like the masks, for example, were very much they were basically an art project. Like the masks are not something that I really take on tour with me because they're much more supposed to be acoustic voice modulation devices. They're robotic, but they modulate my voice kind of acoustically. So it's not really intended to be used in a big PA. It's like good for you're in a gallery and you can modulate your voice with this robotic air actuated thing. And so this was kind of another version of that where I wanted to put different microphones on different parts of my body. And so that as I'm screaming, I could mute and unmute different microphones and pick up the location of what that mic would sound like, say, right on my lung cavity or right on the side of my throat, or what would it sound like if it were put on my skull, so it's like reverberating through the bone or whatever. I was curious about that. Mm-hmm. Of course, I found out that those all sounded the same. The only thing you could really do is put it right on your throat cavity. That would really have the effect that I wanted.
It's more of a vibrational kind of thing.
Yeah. So I put four mics right on my trachea, and I thought 4 because I was thinking like maybe if I delayed these each a little bit, I could have this kind of stereo effect. And I was like, well, you could do 2, but then you could do 4 and it would even be gnarlier. Mm-hmm. But it probably only needed 1, but I basically still use 4 and I put a different effect on each one and I run them through different filters so I can get one is just 100% low end, but you really do pick up this kind of low guttural, almost like Tuvan throat singing or something. I can rumble the PA. It almost sounds like a Moog synthesizer, a really low end Moog when I really rumble it.
I was going to say that there's, if you're listening to the, a lot of things you think are guitar or synthesizer, you realize, oh, that's voice. Like the way that you texture the voice and use it more in a sort of noise source or instrumental way, but without singing per se. You're not really, at least when, are you singing notes to get the tones you want, or are you modulating the sound and doing more growling?
Oh no, I'm singing. I'm making at least with the throat mic, I'm hitting those notes with my voice. So I'm kind of humming into it, or now sometimes I can mute and unmute the different effects. So one of them's just kind of crackly, or one of them's
the times I've seen you live, I remember my first thought, I was like, I wonder what he's doing, because I would see your face look like it was like you were putting a lot of pressure on it, like almost like if you were screaming but with your mouth closed, and then all of a sudden I just hear this I'm like, where is that coming from? And then you just start cranking on all these levers, and then I was just blown away. It's just where all these different sounds are coming from is just pretty wild.
Yeah, and I usually like to start the set with the throat mic because it kind of increases the intensity a little bit before it just becomes a lot of rhythms and beats.
Yeah.
But, all these things I'm kind of redesigning because they all kind of fall apart over time and touring, and at the end of the show you throw it in a box. And so I think the new setup has been mainly about making something that's very robust, lightweight, and can handle on and off stage quickly. Throat mic included good connectors, designed to fit in Pelican Air cases and just trying to make my setup like more comfortable for me throughout a whole tour.
Would you ever look into making and selling them?
Well, it's funny you say that because I've definitely thought about that like endlessly, and I have a few people right now that I'm working with to. So basically, the new devices that I just made are essentially, I would say, prototypes for that. They're smaller. They're 19-inch rack mount devices, and we're kind of like in the early stages of planning some of that. Maybe, I don't know. It's a lot of work. It's my goal is to be a musician, and that's proven to be a huge undertaking to have a successful like music project that.
You'd have to be ready to switch gears for a while.
Yeah, no, I 100% never want to. This is like my main thing, and so to start a company on top of this job, and basically, Author and Punishers become like half of my time. I don't want to take away from that in any way. Mm-hmm. If I look back when I'm 70 and I look back and say, I would much rather say I had a music project that I'm proud of rather than, oh, I started a company.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. We got enough fucking people trying to make money out there. I think we need more artists.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
No disrespect to anyone starting a music company, because it's definitely
it's a different craft. I guess it depends on how you go about it and why you go about it, and what you're trying to build, than just that you kind of shift gears to build something. In a sense, I mean, making music is making something. It is a tangible art form because, like any other thing that you can experience, it is a visceral experience.
I find that if we do this, and probably in the next 6 months or so, I have a little break in January, February, where I would have a chance to kind of get this going. But sorry, my dog just came in. Hi, Uli. If we do it, I think it'll be in a large part because I'm annoyed with the way that people have not really made electronic instruments that are interactive or basically that are instruments. We spent so much time lately on modular synthesizers, and it's amazing. Like, I'm so psyched the direction that's going, and now like with the way that they're now working with software and I think people are a little less like cynic or negative about software. You know, I think after the whole dubstep boom and Skrillex and all this shit, everyone was like, oh no, we need to go in the other direction. Uh-huh. We need to be focused. We don't need dudes up on stage doing nothing in front of a laptop. We need interaction. We need synths. We need hardware. We need analog. So everyone went crazy in that direction. You got all the analog hipsters with their modular synth. And that's totally cool. And it's annoying because they only think that's the only way to make good music, even though most of it sounds like bleep bloops. Mm-hmm. But in software, I still think is the best solution, but a mixture of the two. But what we don't have is good controllers. We still have, we've got that little rubber thing with the keys, and that's a cool instrument. You got there's another one now that almost looks like a joystick that's kind of rubbery that you kind of move around. But for me, it's like, okay, people like a guitar because you're up on stage and they can see everything you're doing.
And you can pound the shit out of it.
And so I'm like, no one is doing this. There's still nobody doing this. And I've been doing this since 2006 or whatever. And I know how to do it. And I find these instruments they're made out of fucking industrial components that feel good. They're heavy. If I do it, it's because I think that the industry needs it. And I think I can meaningfully add to that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing is we haven't really had, there are hybrid acoustic instruments that are coming out, but like there have always been a dearth of sort of options for vocalists. And a lot of what you got is really kind of steered toward using vocals as a broader instrument, not just as a singing instrument, but as a not just because. I mean, I guess that's the thing is there. I feel like there is that need for more ways of expressing music than just various versions of a keyboard or a drum trigger, or a synthesizer that you can, swap patch cables in. I mean, without getting into like kind of cheesy sort of kid toy-esque hardware that you kind of do still see a lot of now and then. You'll see like weird arts and craftsy type thing. And sometimes people will circuit bend those, but like you said, there's nothing that's sort of built to take it.
Right.
That you could really get serious with musically.
Yeah, and stuff that is, I'm psyched. I mean, the modular synth thing is great. And a lot of my friends I probably every electronic DJ from the 2000s has now gone modular or gone electron or gone whatever to basically, I don't blame them. I mean, it's cool, but I still think there's like the turntable was an amazing interface, and that's even got smaller and kind of like less interesting with the CDJ. And I think I think there's just so much room for it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I actually was just having dinner last night with an old friend who's a product design engineer. So we're, and then I've got one of these modular guys who's interested. It's more just like finding the time and the money to basically start it up.
I guess that's the challenge with hardware is that it's software. You really all you need is a computer.
Yeah.
And with hardware, you've got to line up manufacturing.
Yep.
Which I think adds a whole other dimension.
Yeah, you need some startup money. I've spent all my own money on this stuff, but I'm kind of like, if this becomes a company, I'm not going to use my own money.
Yeah.
Well, because you don't want it to sort of steer you away from where you're going.
Yeah, well, this means bringing in other people where I could just be creative lead and just get other people to kind of handle the other components. And we might end up making a device, for example, that has its own synth components in it. So it's kind of its own standalone device that would have a sound that would be my sound that I like to use. But that's difficult. You got to actually design a synth. Maybe it would be like a collaboration with a synth company or something.
Yeah.
But I went to Moogfest this year and I went to their like market that they had all these, startup companies and stuff. It was pretty overwhelming. There's so many companies.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see sort of an explosion of sort of choices and companies out there, and you're sort of looking for what's going to kind of cut through and sort of establish itself as a new sort of direction. And right now it seems like it's all very nebulous, which direction music technology is going to go.
Well, yeah, I think there's something really attractive to synth nerds about these little modules and being able to create it from scratch. But I also feel like there's for the performer, I think that works really well for some people that are kind of like the studio-based bedroom kind of musicians who want to set up a home studio. But I'm not sure it's the best decision for people that are playing live music. And it doesn't appeal to the person who's a performer. There are some. I think some of the Moog stuff, because it has keys on it and they're these like standalone devices, I think that is a little bit more accessible. So I still think that there's we're still kind of basically with MIDI land performing live. You're still kind of stuck with a keyboard or a grid of pads and knobs. So I think there's an opening. I mean, I think if I made 100 of one of my devices, I think we'd probably sell them.
Yeah.
But would it catch on? So that's probably what we're looking to do is borrow some money from somebody, make 100, and then see how it does. Go from there.
I mean, I think the visual aesthetic will probably have a huge impact on on how well it does, because if it feels like it's got sort of an identity right off the bat, that I think will usually click with people. If it doesn't feel like sort of a baby step in a direction, but rather feels like it's designed for its purpose and it's sort of there and real.
Yeah. I mean, you just keep them simple. I found, I know what works for me with these devices. I know what doesn't work. And I think to take these things to a place where they're something that's commercially viable, those little idiosyncrasies that I deal with, that those little issues need to be fixed, because people aren't going to want to deal with that crap.
Yeah.
No, they're going to want plug and play.
They want to plug and play, or they're going to, this bearing is, dirty. I'm like, well, clean it, like there's things like that are like, the bearings get dirty, oh, you need to grease it. Oh, I used the wrong grease. So you have to, there's a fucking spec for a ball bearing on a shaft where you have to like tell them what type of grease to use. And then if they use the wrong grease, they're going to be like, I want my money back. And you're going to be like, oh my God, these people are retarded. I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
So
I definitely feel like there's people out there who like to get their hands dirty. The more the guys who like to, take things apart and putting them back together. So I think there's definitely people out there looking for something like this. Kind of like yourself, like you felt like there was something missing, something that you can use to sort of, work on your art. So I definitely think that there's people out there who would be into something like this.
Yeah, get rid of the plastic. That will be one of the things. We will try to not have any plastic. Try to keep them all metal. You can take it apart like you can your AR-15, so it'll be very popular in America.
What are some of the devices that you're thinking about doing? Because I know you have like the arm controller that is sort of like a beat machine that you can do like the kick and snare, and I noticed you have the finger triggers too. What are some of the sounds that those triggers actually control? Because when I'll watch you play, I'll notice you're sort of doing all these different movements. Is that all basically just drum sounds, or?
It's all drum sounds, but it could be anything you want. I mean, it's a linear encoder. It's got 8 buttons. It's programmed by an Arduino. I mean, you can program it however you want. I basically just do different combinations of buttons will trigger different at different positions along the length. Will trigger different drum sounds. So different samples. You can use the length to map to a knob or a filter. So I've tried all sorts of different stuff.
What plays the sample?
Ableton.
Ableton.
But I also, when I wrote this album, I just hooked it up to an analog rhythm, electron analog rhythm. So I would basically just map the buttons to different analog rhythm pads or MPC pads. So you can play the samples with whatever you want.
Go into a computer, or you could go into a synthesizer or whatever.
Or you could go and see out CV into a modular rack. So you can do all 3 of those: USB, MIDI, or CV.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, there's just I don't know. It's just basically like it's just a controller, just like any other knob or button box.
We're gonna have to send you a load of samples, a lot of content, see if you can have any fun with it.
Yeah, man, I'm open to that. I think it would be I'm always open to playing around with different stuff.
Yeah,
we've got a lot of ordinary, like standard classical instruments, but we got a lot of weird stuff too that you might have fun with.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'm like it's sometimes like on the new album actually I used an old Alesis drum machine that I'm running through some newer effects, and that was really cool because it had this old like 90s era digital sound that kind of broke up nice under distortion. So like just finding these like weird avenues to get new sounds. Sometimes it's going backwards is better.
Yeah. Alesis especially is funny because in the 90s, they had some really cool effects hardware.
Yeah.
Like the Wedge that you can't even get anymore because they've gone way downhill into kind of a consumer range. But there was some vision in the sound. I mean, like they were onto something, and unfortunately, it seemed like they got off track.
Yeah, I know what you mean. that happened, and that's a concern when you're a company like that. You don't want to. It's almost like I was thinking about with these devices, like, oh, do you want to make it? Do you want to make it more accessible so people can afford it, or do you want to make it really expensive and super high end so that like people really value it? You know, there's like two different paths you could take there.
Yeah, more of a boutique approach, sort of.
Yeah, boutique approach. It doesn't mean that you. I mean, that's how I build my stuff. The only reason I've gone lighter is because of weight for airplanes. Otherwise, I would probably make everything out of like stainless steel and really use the highest quality components I possibly can. But then I won't be able to travel anywhere. So, you know, aluminum and water jet cutting has been something I've been doing more lately because it's faster to prototype and it's lighter and all this kind of shit.
How long did it actually take when you were prototyping everything in the beginning as far as the different instruments that you were building? Because when I was watching some of the videos where you were talking about the process, I was just thinking, like, how many times, I wonder, did he have to build these different prototypes before you actually found sort of what worked?
I would say it took me about, you know, for example, the new drum controller that I made, it probably took me 4 or 5 months to really kind of build it completely. But you know, and then after that, it's, I totally misdesigned that whole entire, like the stylus that I built, or I used the wrong controller, or the box is not big enough for the electronics because I had to change it. So that really is another few months. And now I took it on tour and I broke 4 parts of it. So now I got to redesign that. I don't know, man. It's like endless years to really get the thing. And then you're just like, well, I'll just deal with that. But as a product, man, it would just be endless revisions, you know. It's they're kind of beasts. Yeah. I mean, some of the simpler ones, even like the knob box that I just built, it's to get the bearings and the shafts to spin properly and get the machining on the lathe to be perfect is like, that's harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
So
you recently signed with Relapse. Before that, you were on Housecore Records. What made you decide to change labels?
I just had finished with Housecore and had a good run with them and had a good album. I was proud of it. Did some tours with them, and then just basically wanted a little bit wider audience. And I started looking at some labels that are out there, and I'd sent it around various places, had some conversations. And then I knew the Relapse people through this old label I was on called Seventh Rule, which was a friend up in Portland. This guy, Scott Flaster, boutique doom metal label. That guy helped me immensely. I mean, even after I had left his label for Housecore, he was like he almost was like my manager. He was just helping me find. And he actually connected me with Relapse up in Portland because they have their kind of like connections there and in Philly. So yeah, we just talked to them, and Relapse jumped on it right away. They were like totally into it, had been fans before. And so
that's cool.
That for me was big, just because I think finding audience size for me was the main thing. Just needed like have distribution and a team of people working on it. It's tough with smaller labels, like Seventh Rule and like Housecore, when there's basically like 3 people working at the label, you know.
And then, like a lot of bands try to spread their energy between.
Yeah, a lot of bands spread their energy between. You know, it's tough also when you have a label that's kind of like a project of a person like Phil Anselmo, or, you know, I know there's a lot of labels like this that people that have been successful will start a label, and it's amazing. They put all their money into it just because they love the music. But at the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily translate to the widest spread of your music. And you know, that's, I have no complaints. It was just, I was ready to step it up.
I think what's fascinating about the change, I mean, like there was a thought that labels in a sense would be going away, but because the ability to record at home makes, it's a great equalizer. You can produce music that is as like production-wise completely on par with anything that any major label artist can put out. There's not a distinction in terms of quality anymore between something you could do in your bedroom and something you could do at the most expensive studio in the world. But there is still a very important piece, and that's communicating to an audience, creating the audience, building it, spreading it, so that people who are sort of fertile, who are, ground for the style, who want that kind of music, can find it. If you don't know what's out there, because there's a sea of it, a sea of different stuff, and that all you can really do is bounce from artist to artist that's like, connected, like maybe on the same label or touring together, or you just hear by word of mouth. I mean, the industrial scene, it was all basically word of mouth plus a couple of zines back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and it was really sort of difficult to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. And I think a label actually has an important place in the music industry again, or has had that if they approach it the right way, which is not as not looking at the artist as simply a resource to extract. And looking at the artist and the label as a partnership to help bring the artist to its market.
Yeah, but also I think for the artist too, not looking at a label and expecting them to do everything. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, we got signed, that's it. When it's like you still have to work just as hard on putting your stuff out there and creating good content. Because I think from my experience, when it comes to labels, one of the big benefactors of it is the distribution. Because a lot of times people don't have the time or resources to put their music out there. They don't know how. I mean, there's a lot of services out there that kind of help. But I think that's one of the things with a good label is just being able to, get your stuff out there in stores or, different places like that. Or also too helping with tour, with like touring. Sometimes labels can get you on tours that maybe if let's say you're not on a booking agent or something, sometimes labels can help out with that. So they do have their place. But at the same time, I think we live in a place or in a time where I think you can do it yourself. You just have to be really savvy when it comes to the, putting your stuff out there online.
I've found that, I just self-released the EP last summer because it was in between labels, and I had basically just signed a Relapse and had already recorded the recording. And I think it was the right decision to not release it with them. And they didn't want to do it because it was already past the time when it would fit into their schedule. So basically just released it on my own, and they helped me promote it. Cool. But the funny thing was we already sold in the first week of releasing my first single back in August 5th or whatever that was. We already sold more in the first week on pre-orders than I sold the whole run of the Pressure Mind EP that I self-released last summer. Wow. And so it was oh, this is why you release on a label, because I thought that was fine. I made my money back very quickly on that EP. I think I spent $2,800 to basically get the records printed, the vinyl printed. And I borrowed the money from a friend, paid him back very quickly. That was great. But, I sell, those trickle out, on my Bandcamp, and I take them on tour with me, and I made 500, I'll sell them. But it's that's the 500 is that's not doing that well if that's what you're selling on an album for hard copies. You gotta, there's just no comparison. The connections that Relapse have, the reputation, the label's been around a long time, so I think it's people flow in and out of these kind of situations, and I think by signing some younger, more electronic bands, they've changed their image a little bit with Survive and Nothing, and some other bands that are a little bit outside of the death metal realm, and that was interesting, attractive to me. But man, I have a lot of friends who will do self-releases, and it's a grind. And I always, people are anxious, they've already recorded it, and there's a bit of naivety to think that let's say it's July, you just finished your album, and you're in your mind as a musician, you want that album to come out like now because you just made it. But that's not the way it works. You know, like if you want to get that in magazines, then you basically got to like, I know, yeah, okay, Beyonce and Rihanna will just surprise drop an album on us. Well, they don't need any promotion. They're already huge. They've got millions of followers. So I try to tell my friends, do not self-release. Take the time, look for a label. But then they're like, yeah, but, and then by the time October rolls around, their interest in music is, oh, I don't like my album anymore. Like there's this kind of like short-sightedness that, I mean, I've been this way back when I was first releasing stuff. It's just not the way to do things. You really have to like take the time, tour on that album, have a demo that you take with you. Just wait until you can find somebody. I don't know. I have a lot of friends who kind of ask me like, hey, you take me on tour, or like, where can we, how can I get my music out of San Diego? And there's no other simple way than just get on the road, book your tour. Oh, but I need a booking agent. Well, you're not going to have a booking agent. You need to just write to promoters and go to Portland and play some hall with some punk bands, and then meet people at the show. And then the next month when you can go up there, you can like make connections.
And don't expect that fans are just going to fall in love with you by the millions without being convinced.
Right. By having some social media posts that you do.
They're like, yeah, we posted once on Facebook, and they just expect, 100 people to be at their show. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, man. You got to get out there.
You got to get out there. And that's not to say that like, I mean, I think, man, I'm very frustrated with like shows that are about like music, like whatever, The Voice and this kind of shit, because it basically gives people like a false hope of becoming a Instagram or like a social media star. And when you play the kind of music that we play, especially in like darker underground world, like that's not the same thing. You need to go out and you need to get involved with shows and do touring. It's sacrifice. And there's no other way to do it. I mean, fuck, man, it took me probably 7 years of doing that constantly, just like, I don't know, maybe 4 tours a year, hopping in the van and just struggling with 15 people. Yeah. And there's still shows in Europe where there's 10 to 15 people. So
yeah, it's one of those things. It's just kind of like the nature of the beast, especially in the more like I come from more like the metal and death metal, and our first tour we ever did, there'd be like 5-10 people, and it's just kind of like, but when it's exactly. Like when it's in the early days or like your first tour, you don't really care. You're just like, this is awesome. We're doing it, But
drink tickets.
Yeah, we got 5 drink tickets, man. This is the greatest show ever, and it's, but it's kind of like you need to do that, and it's almost like you like you said, you got to do the work.
You got to love it too. I mean, that's just the fact that you've made that jump is huge, and putting a tour poster online where it has 20 dates listed on it, whether those dates are at venues that anyone's ever heard of, that is a big deal. Like getting that shit out there to say, hey, I've committed to this. Just doing that, I don't care what the shows are like. If you're doing that a few times a year, you are going to network and meet people and be noticed. And unfortunately, that means that you've got to have a different job than probably what most people are doing. Yeah.
Although now, I mean, with the way that the economy's kind of unraveling, a lot more people are doing kind of gig style jobs. They're not able to, they're stringing together multiple jobs. So a lot of times they sort of, there maybe is that space in their life for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope, maybe the silver lining of this whole thing is that we'll start to see, I don't know, more politically and socially motivated music. Protest music would be really good to see again.
Yeah, it's fucking time.
Yeah, it's like I don't know if you listen to Napalm Death, but I just saw them recently, and one of the things I love about them is just the way Barney talks. Is like you see their music, it's so extreme, and so there's so much energy. But then when you hear him talk, he's just like, you could tell he's an intelligent dude, and he has his finger on what's going on, and he's just most people wouldn't expect that kind of actual thought put into grindcore, but it's really cool to see that there are some bands who are doing that.
Yeah. I mean, like listening to bands like His Hero's Gone and Fugazi and Helmet and growing up in the 90s, this is what that's what music was to me. It was very intelligent. That's the people that I hung out with were very politically conscious. It was the straight edge vegan kind of era, and I really liked that. It's not that I was straight edge or vegan, but I liked it was socially conscious. People were thinking about their actions.
It's not just that whole metal aesthetic that I think a lot of people think like, oh, let's just get drunk and mosh. Like there's actually people there that when you sit down and talk with them, you're like, wow, these guys got a brain.
Exactly. They're just got a little bit more energy, testosterone going or something.
Yeah. After they mosh, then they're all talking about all these, thought-provoking topics. You're like, whoa, I didn't expect that. Yeah,
I think we need that again, and I think it's starting to creep its way back in. When hardcore kind of like went metalcore in like the early 2000s, and then that kind of died out in, I don't know, 2008, or I can't really remember. And now it's kind of creeping back in again, but with maybe a different feel. Or maybe I've got these, maybe it's just because I'm 40 now that I'm like I don't know really where it's going, but I'm seeing a lot more politically motivated stuff.
Yeah, I think there was like a decade after the 90s where there was sort of this bread and circuses sort of cultural nullification that went on, with the rise of a new kind of entertainment that turned everything into this flat mush. There wasn't really any value between sort of the meaning of the music versus its popularity.
Right.
It just, it's almost like culture tried to grab all of itself, package it into products, and sort of spread it out. There's not really, there became like this lack of creative direction or purpose in a lot of art.
Yeah, taking the gesture too far, taking hardcore and it became, gent, just over the top. Dubstep did the same thing. Like I love dubstep, and it comes through in everything that I do. But it was like that went to a place that no one wanted to be involved with it anymore.
Sort of technical for its own sake.
Yeah, exactly. But and now I think that people have like given up on that. It's like, oh, now I can listen to this again, and no one even no one will be bothered. But like, the kind of UK dubstep and like the earlier drum and bass, I love that stuff, and all those genres kind of went too far. So
I have a friend of mine I used to play in a band with, and he was all in the drum, dubstep, drum and bass, but like you said, the UK stuff, and a lot of his friends hated it. And then Skrillex came out, and then all of a sudden everyone loved it. And he was just like, dude, like, what is this? Like, you guys were all, hating on it before, but now it's like it takes someone to kind of put it in that more of a pop spotlight or something, and then it just kind of turns into the next trend when, it's kind of like even metal too, like death metal. Like I used to be in high school with people who hated Cannibal Corpse, and then Between the Bear to Me came out, and then everyone was like, oh yeah, now this is cool. When everyone hated that kind of vocal style, it's crazy how that works out. Yeah,
it was more of a style thing than it was about the music. It's industrial, 100%. I mean, I probably complained about the industrial scene in every podcast I've ever been on, because I just find the whole thing to be so aesthetically based, which has probably worked in my favor to a certain extent. So I probably shouldn't complain about it too much, but.
Well, it's performative in a way, rather than sort of about something. Yeah, it was, rather than being about something, it was all it curdled into this fashion movement.
Exactly.
And then the whole like weird the sort of raver goth thing kind of took off.
Red thread in your hair.
Yeah, and then it just went off in a random direction, and the music went sort of straight synth pop. And there were some good moments there. I mean, like I could get it, a Pop Tigma Berserk and B&B Nation, things like that. But it became so much more about the style and the fashion, at least in the scene, than it was about sort of any sort of musical exploration or expression at a point.
Yep. Yeah, I go to these festivals a lot now, and I'm just like, what the hell is going on here? But whatever. I'm still most comfortable in my, like Roadburn, I played a couple of years ago, and that was just, that was the best. It was just like a bunch of people that I could just hang out with endlessly. I felt at home in that world. Slow, beer drinking, doom metal. That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us. It was really cool, man.
Yeah. Good to meet you guys, and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Take it easy, man.
All right. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
So I want to thank you guys for tuning into the Soundiron podcast with Author and Punisher. He's definitely one of the most innovative people out there in the scene right now. So if you want to find some more information on him and his instruments, make sure to go to tristanshone.com. And if you like these podcasts, make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review, and let us know what you guys think. So thanks again for listening, and we will see you next time.